We live, we die. About a week later, we get back up and start tearing the flesh off of whoever is most convenient to fill the emptiness in our bacteria-bloated corpses. That is most definitely not a metaphor for our desperate search for connection in this hopeless slog of repetitive day-to-day existence. Sometimes, there's sex and/or blood. Meaningless Cycles in a Vicious Glass Prison by Anton Cancre takes images from Michel Soave's classic Della Morte dell'Amore and wraps them into poems of obsession, death, and nihilistic terror. Marge Simon, multiple Stoker Award-winning poetess, says that you will feel a sentient presence, obstinate and irreverent, as Cancre's poems unfold. And patron saint of horror and wonder Linda Addison says, each poem sings very meaningful patterns of life, love, and death, often in dreamlike realities outside time and space. Meaningless Cycles in a Vicious Glass Prison by Anton Cancre is available in paperback and for Nook and Kindle via Dragon's Roost Press, Barnes & Noble, and Amazon.
That is not dead which can eternal lie, and with strange eons a podcast shall rise. H.P. Lovecraft, Weird Tales, Ramsey Campbell, Cthulhu, Laird Barron, Silent Hill, Brian Lumley, Dagon. There's something sinister out there in the cosmos, and the tendrils run deep throughout the universe. Only one woman dares to traverse the web. Mary SanGiovanni, who once again is up to cosmic shenanigans.
Hi folks, welcome to Cosmic Shenanigans. This is Mary SanGiovanni, and as always, I am up to shenanigans of cosmic proportions. And speaking of cosmic proportions, our discussion today is going to be about a movie called Starfish. This has been recommended from a handful of listeners that it would be something interesting to cover on Cosmic Shenanigans, and I finally got around to seeing it, and it really is kind of an interesting and fascinating cosmic horror story where part of the cosmic horror is in the theme. And I think that that's not, the cosmic horror is usually a structure, a framework for telling a story and delving into certain themes. But I think even the themes in this story have a cosmic horror, metaphor for what they're actually getting at. This movie came out in September of 2018. It was directed by A.T. White, who also wrote the screenplay, and it stars Virginia Gardner as Aubrey, Christina Masterson as Grace, Eric Beecroft as Edward, who is has a minor part as a boyfriend, which we'll get to, and Natalie Mitchell, who is probably the only other character with an actual online presence and speaking role. There are other characters in it, but mostly they're either voices or they're alluded to, but not actually seen. Now, primarily, this movie is a story about grief. I mean, there's just no question about it. Aubrey is popular and outgoing, and she loses her best friend, Grace. Now, it's suggested that she loses Grace because of an illness, although you'd have to dig kind of deep to discover what what White had in mind for what exactly she died from. We're never really told, although we do know from recordings of things that Grace said that she had gone for tests, and that she really found it sort of terrifying to no longer be in control of her body. So there is almost a cosmic horror suggestion. You know, we've talked before about the idea of transcendence and transformation as a very frequently occurring concept in cosmic horror, and in that it is terrifying, especially when you lose control of those changes to your body. There is that suggestion there. I don't think that the implication was supposed to be the classic, people changing into creatures kind of thing that she was going through. One could think it might have been cancer or some other kind of deteriorating illness, which must have progressed fairly quickly, given sort of the timeline of the movie. But essentially, Grace is gone, and we only really see Grace through flashbacks and hallucinations. But clearly, her relationship with Aubrey was very close. Aubrey is a DJ for a local radio station, and so she has that bit of renown in the town there. But you get the impression too that she of the relationship was the more outgoing, the more popular, the more engaging of the pair. And one of the things I think is interesting, because a lot of horror movies in general, except maybe something like The Descent, don't really look at this, but especially Cosmic Horror doesn't often look at the relationships between women and the complexities of those relationships between women, how the dynamics usually work in close female relationship pairs, where there's usually, and I suppose it could be true for men too, but in a lot of relationships with women, there usually is one who is more outgoing and one who is more reserved. There's a lot of balance. I think a lot of female relationships look for balance. They look for being able to bring something to a relationship that's different than what the person already has. And when you lose that, you often feel like you're losing a part of yourself, maybe a bigger and better part of yourself. And I think that there's a bit of a sense of that there, that Grace maybe grounded Aubrey in a lot of ways, and that she brought, I guess, a dose of reality to Aubrey's life, which is sort of ironic given that the initiating incidents for the cosmic horror actually come from Grace. But basically what we're looking at are two very, very powerful emotions here. Grief, as I mentioned, that Aubrey is mourning the loss of Grace, and also guilt, because we find out that Aubrey harbors a lot of guilt for certain things that happened in her relationship with Grace. And without giving out any spoilers, basically that these things would have impinged on or negatively impacted her relationship with Grace, and whether or not Grace was aware of them is also not entirely clear in the movie. But if you look at these two very powerful human emotions, you could see a suggestion there that there is a cosmic horror aspect to them, that they are much larger, so much larger than any one person. And when you are in the grips of guilt or grief, you feel that sometimes it is almost overwhelming, that these emotions are sometimes all-consuming, and that they're essentially, because they're emotions, indifferent to the suffering that they cause. Sometimes they feel utterly inescapable, and that both of them change us from what we were to something else. So there is a very cosmic horror-y aspect to the two main emotional themes in this movie to begin with. But there's also actual cosmic horror in the story itself. The premise that, basically and this is a slow burn kind of movie, I'll say that up front, because a good 20 to 30 minutes of the, beginning of this movie is more of an exploration of the grief and the discomfort that Aubrey feels in getting through the mechanics of mourning to get to the essence of how she really needs to mourn in order to move on from this great loss. But once we get to the actual premise, it's the idea that Grace, before her death, was working with a research group. And now, again, there's very little information. You could almost say that this is in lieu of a cult or a substitute for a cult, but she's working with this research group that basically their they're basically like SETI. You know, they listen for sounds in space and then try to correlate if there's any meaning and, you know, that kind of thing. But Grace has found them. Grace has found meaning in a fragment of sounds and frequencies, which seem to be looping. Like if you were to put them together, they would loop. But there's a deliberacy to them. There's a specificness that the group seems to find there. Now, they're not aware of, you know, whether or not this is a new signal being sent out by some interdimensional or alien race to try to communicate with us. They are not sure if this is an ancient loop that has been going on and on and on for eons, or if it's actually all just coincidental and that people are hearing what they want to hear because it is human nature to look for patterns. But we get the sense that the group believes, and therefore the audience is to believe, that it is probably an ancient, very ancient signal that has been sent out just waiting for somebody, you know, intelligent enough to decode it, and that it is it's almost a knock on the door, basically, because what Grace discovers is that these segments are essentially keys to opening doors to other planes of reality, other dimensions, alternate realities, and that she tells in a recording left for Aubrey, Grace says that she believes they're only harmful if they're played incompletely or they're played out of order or if they're somehow corrupted, if the sound is corrupted. But if they're put together in the right order and played all at once, that it will ultimately close the doors that this group has inadvertently opened by playing them as they found them. Now, Grace says that she is the only one to have found all 7 segments of these, and that she has embedded them within music or sound bites on cassette tapes, and that she's hidden them around town. And that in this recording she leaves for Aubrey, she asks Aubrey to go find them and put them together and play them to close these doors. Now, these audio cassette tapes, I think, serve in lieu of pages of a forbidden tome written eons ago by unknown alien composers. These segments, these embedded segments, are kind of like those spells that you're not supposed to read from the Necronomicon. You get that sense that there is a lot of power behind these, and you see that when Aubrey plays the various segments. And I kind of love this idea in a way, that this idea that sound is as powerful a force, you know, or that frequency, it can serve as an actual physical key or portal for influencing the unseen.
We live, we die. About a week later, we get back up and start tearing the flesh off of whoever is most convenient to fill the emptiness in our bacteria-bloated corpses. That is most definitely not a metaphor for our desperate search for connection in this hopeless slog of repetitive day-to-day existence. Sometimes, there's sex and/or blood. Meaningless Cycles in a Vicious Glass Prison by Anton Cancray takes images from Michel Soave's classic Della Morte dell'Amore and wraps them into poems of obsession, death, and nihilistic terror. Marge Simon, multiple Stoker Award-winning poetess, says that you will feel a sentient presence, obstinate and irreverent, as Cancray's poems unfold. And patron saint of horror and wonder Linda Addison says, each poem sings very meaningful patterns of life, love, and death, often in dreamlike realities outside time and space. Meaningless Cycles in a Vicious Glass Prison by Anton Cancray is available in paperback and for Nook and Kindle via Dragon's Roost Press, Barnes & Noble, and Amazon.
And what I like about this movie, although, you know, and it's one of those things where you either take to it or you don't in this movie, that the different segments of the film show these alternate realities in a series of surreal moments that Aubrey experiences. That these segments do open and close doorways to other dimensions upon playing them, and that and some realities are very different than ours. Some are like a snow version, like an entire winter night version of the world, or an animated version of the world, and some are different places entirely, different worlds entirely, and that these segments are very powerful in that, despite the music going on over or under them, that they do have the power to influence the world. And I think for people who appreciate music, I think that that's almost a given, there are certain things, and I know we've touched on this before in Cosmic Shenanigans, that art in its various forms is something that most people believe to be bigger or beyond us in a way, and that it has the power to transform, and that it has the power to influence, and that it is essentially, perhaps the antithesis or the opposite of cosmic horror, and that it's maybe cosmic goodness, that we are creating something lasting, something that can, counteract or contradict somehow the evils of the world, and I like this idea of sound being doorways that can open to other dimensions. And if you think about it, it's not completely unscientific in that there have been scientific articles which have addressed the idea that sound does have an effect on people and their mental and physical well-being, and that it does affect, things like electromagnetic waves, sound waves, radio waves do affect the world around us, and sometimes even change certain fundamental laws of physics in ways that we can't understand. So that's essentially what the cosmic horror force, the equivalent of the ancient forbidden tomes, are these sounds, these little bits of sound. Now, a cosmic horror, in my opinion, a cosmic horror story is always made better, of course, by cosmic horror entities, and this movie has them, and they are delightful. There's 2 or 3 different kinds of entities, really, that we're looking at here. The most common, the one that Aubrey comes across first, is what I think of as kind of guard dogs. They look like anglerfish, but they're about the size of horses, and they have legs and claws, and they crawl around. They're 4-legged animals, but their faces are sort of anglerfish-like. And they are clearly very dangerous, because what you're getting here now is that in having played the sounds, not Aubrey, but the people before that, while Aubrey is dealing with the death of her best friend, it coincides with essentially the end of the world, or the beginning of the end of the world. Because while she's lost in grief on New Year's Eve, when New Year's Day is ushered in, it ushers in a new world, really. We look a lot at the idea of endings and beginnings in this movie, which cosmic horror does often. It looks at the ends of things as the beginning of things, and the beginning of things as the end of things. And this movie does this too. So on New Year's Day, it is the beginning of the end of the world. And the only guidance other than Grace's tape that Aubrey has is a voice across a walkie-talkie that seems to know her. And it knows of her, at least. And this voice claims to be a friend of Grace's, and that's why he wants to help her. And what he does is he saves her life. She is trapped in a store. The door is locked. She had gone out into the snow to chase after somebody who looked injured. And she comes across one of these guard dog type creatures, and it chases her back to a store, and it's about to break through the glass when this voice over the walkie-talkie explains to her that the sounds that Grace was working on can also, despite the fact that they seem attracted to these sounds, or that these sounds seem to be some type of doorway through which they can enter and I guess leave this dimension, that they're also afraid of them somehow. And he plays one of these sounds, one of these segments over the walkie-talkie, and it makes the monster go away. It makes the creature go away. And so the way I interpret that, the way I took that, is that if you're looking at the power of these kinds of things, again, in most cosmic horror stories, the entities are indifferent, and the spells can work both ways. They can summon and they can banish. And I think that's what the sounds do. They can summon and they can banish. The thing is that human beings, these are very new things that we're playing with that we probably shouldn't, as is often true in cosmic horror. And I think what we see here then is that the sound is capable of both summoning and banishing, but we're not sure how the logistics work. Now, there are other cosmic horror entities. Again, some of them are more subtle in that they almost seem a part of the background, or they seem a part of the alternate reality that Aubrey finds herself in. But patience is rewarded. There is a glimpse of something sort of Cthulhu-headed, which is taller than a skyscraper. I mean, it's huge. It's absolutely huge. And it's got waving tentacles, and it has actual storms within its body. It's so big that what would be this sort of nebulous body beneath this massive, massive, massive head and tentacles actually has storms in it, lightning and thunder. And I've used that in my own work, the idea of storms, that a thing can be so big and so powerful that to truly represent its chaotic nature, that it's capable of having storms within its own body. And also because I think storms tend to represent the chaotic and greater forces of nature, which I think a lot of the cosmic horror entities are a manifestation of, that they are representative of these ginormous forces of nature, which are destructive when they want to be, but are indifferent to their destruction. So ultimately, what we're left with is Aubrey putting together these fragments. And again, if you haven't seen the movie, there's a spoiler alert, so put me on pause while you go watch the movie and then come back. But the spoiler of the movie is that putting together these pieces does not have the effect that Grace thought it would. That ultimately what she's doing is exactly what the entities wanted her to do, not maybe what Grace wanted her to do. But over the course of the movie, we see that in taking on the agency of trying to save the world, in some way she's also trying to save her relationship with Grace, and she's trying to move past certain things. And I think what she comes to understand is that part of embracing the future is letting go of the past. That in and of itself, releasing yourself from guilt and sorrow, is a kind of transformation in and of itself. And it makes you different. It doesn't mean that those things don't matter, and it doesn't mean that those things haven't affected you, but being able to let them go is a further transformation. And I think that's essentially the theme of this, is that in learning to forgive yourself, you are allowed a certain kind of transcendence and transformation to occur. And, as some cosmic horror will suggest, sometimes that's okay. Sometimes change is okay, and sometimes it's just inevitable. And I think that this movie sort of captures both concepts there, that it's going to happen anyway. The world is going to change, and you can either change with it and adapt, or die, or go insane. And Aubrey ultimately chooses to change with it. So that's basically Starfish. It is surreal. It is a slow burning kind of story, but it really is fascinating. And it is some really kind of cool cosmic horror. So I will see you guys next week, and we will talk more shenanigans out in the cosmos, and we'll have a lot of fun doing it. Okay? Talk to you later. Bye.
We live, we die. About a week later, we get back up and start tearing the flesh off of whoever is most convenient to fill the emptiness in our bacteria-bloated corpses. That is most definitely not a metaphor for our desperate search for connection in this hopeless slog of repetitive day-to-day existence. Sometimes, there's sex and/or blood. Meaningless Cycles in a Vicious Glass Prison by Anton Cancre takes images from Michel Soave's classic Della Morte dell'Amore and wraps them into poems of obsession, death, and nihilistic terror. Marge Simon, multiple Stoker Award-winning poetess, says that you will feel a sentient presence, obstinate and irreverent, as Cancre's poems unfold. And patron saint of horror and wonder Linda Addison says, each poem sings very meaningful patterns of life, love, and death, often in dreamlike realities outside time and space. Meaningless Cycles in a Vicious Glass Prison by Anton Cancre is available in paperback and for Nook and Kindle via Dragon's Roost Press, Barnes & Noble, and Amazon.
Cosmic Shenanigans. You can listen to this episode and all previous episodes for free on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, YouTube, Google Play Music, and wherever else podcasts are available. Cosmic Shenanigans is written and produced by Mary SanGiovanni. Our theme music is by Xander Harris. Our engineer is Matt Wilderson. Check out his books on Amazon.com.